Hello, and thank you for joining us for what I hope will be an interesting and informative discussion around some of the latest data in rheumatology. My name is Professor Peter Nash from the Griffith University in beautiful downtown Brisbane, where it's a lovely summer's day. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Atul Deodhar from the Oregon Health and Science University in the USA. Firstly, welcome, Atul. Lovely to see you again, and I hope you're all well and COVID-free and the family's all doing well.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Yes, I'm well and my family is well as well. Thanks.
So today we're going to talk about a paper that Atul was an author on, which is a review of the JAK-STAT signaling in the pathogenesis of spondyloarthritis and the role of JAK inhibition in the spondyloarthropathies. But just as an intro, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Atul, your journey to get to Oregon, and a little bit about your interests and the things that you've been working on lately?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So I'm a rheumatologist. My current title is Professor of Medicine at Oregon Health and Science University. And I arrived in Oregon through England. So I trained in India, went to medical school in India, and then I went to England to do my rheumatology. And I trained at Bath, where my interest in axial spondyloarthritis started. And I did my MD in England, which is like writing a thesis. And I also did my membership of Royal College of Physicians. And then I moved to US in Portland, where I did another fellowship and joined on the faculty. And I'm the medical director of the rheumatology clinic here at Oregon Health and Science University and professor of medicine. And my research interest is axial spondyloarthritis as well as psoriatic arthritis, both being part of the group of diseases called spondyloarthritis. And I do clinical trials, I do epidemiological work, and a little bit of research with my colleagues here in the lab.
Excellent, excellent. And can you tell us, just before we move on, how has COVID affected your work and how has it changed things in your practice just for the time being?
So we were affected very severely around March of 2020. And we completely shut down the clinics for about a month, and we discovered that was not really possible. And we opened half a day of clinic just to see patients who required face-to-face visit. And then we slowly started building on that. We have been doing 50-50 of virtual visits and 50% face-to-face. That has now become 75% face-to-face and 25% virtual. And I think that is where it's going to stay in the foreseeable future. This is the only Oregon Health and Science University is the only medical school for a very long distance. The entire state of Oregon, and people come from long distances. So in a way, the virtual clinics are also useful for patients who have a follow-up appointment and things that they just want to, there isn't much examination involved. We are able to assess them quite well virtually. We are slowly opening up, but now, of course, as we are recording this in the month of December, with this new Omicron strain, we don't know how things are going to change. Yeah.
And again, look, before we get into the paper, the gorilla in the room is oral surveillance. Your thoughts and how it's affected JAK prescribing in the US. Has it made a big change? For example, the comment I heard last night at one of our meetings was that there's been a trend back to TNFs away from JAKs as people react to what has not even a peer-reviewed publication yet, just a few presentations at ACR.
Yes, so the oral surveillance study has impacted us definitely at OHSU. And in the US, there is a lot of stress on defensive medicine. And there is a worry that if you do some harm, there could be some medical legal consequences. And because of that, there is this trend moving away from JAK inhibitors, or at least talking to our patients. In my personal practice and in my division, I'm the medical director, and we directed all my colleagues to specifically write emails. Actually, there's a electronic way we communicated with our patients that there are new risk that have surfaced about JAK inhibitors, and FDA has given a new JAK black box warning, and we would like to discuss that with you. And we added a little bit information in that letter, but then every time a patient comes to see us, we discuss with the patient and do a much more involved shared decision making, which anyway is a good practice in everyday medicine, clinical medicine. But that has led us to move some patients from JAK inhibitors to other possible therapies, especially patients with rheumatoid arthritis, especially if they were above the age of 50, and especially if they had some cardiovascular risk factors.
Okay. Yes, it's an interesting time. We are struggling in the monotherapy space in particular because we can't get tocilizumab for the love of money. It's all taken up by COVID treatment. We don't have sarilumab, so that monotherapy space, everyone's being changed to a JAK from Tosi, and it's very interesting. So let's talk about this paper recently published in the British Journal Rheumatology. It's reviewing JAK-STAT signaling in the spondyloarthropathies. I think it was an AbbVie sponsored thing by the look of all the different authors and things, but can you tell us a little bit about what led you to put this paper together? What were the aims of the paper? And then we'll talk about maybe methods and results.
Yeah, so the pathogenesis of spondyloarthritis is quite, I mean, it's kind of opaque in a way. It's we don't exactly understand how spondyloarthritis starts, even though we have ideas about the genetics and the environmental factors. But several times we know that there is increased IL-17 and increased TNF. So TNF inhibition and IL-17 inhibition was straightforward for rheumatologists to understand how that works in spondyloarthritis. JAK inhibitors are somewhat of a different story, and there has been confusion in the minds of rheumatologists as to exactly how JAK inhibitors work. Certainly, there have been phase 2 and phase 3 studies, and we can discuss that later, but those on JAK inhibitors showing that they do work. And the reason why we decided to do a review of literature and publish this study was to explain how JAK inhibitors, which there is, I mean, IL-17 receptor and TNF receptors do not have JAK at the bottoms of those receptors, intracellular signaling pathway. But still, JAK inhibitors work quite well. And the idea behind publishing this paper was to look at which cytokines directly and indirectly get affected by JAK, and which of those are important in the pathogenesis of axial SPA. So that was the idea why we did this work.
Okay. And how did you go about it? Just a literature review and then a summary?
Yes, this was mostly literature review of how JAK inhibitors really work and which all cytokines they block, and which of these cytokines are important in the pathogenesis of axial SPA. And we found some interesting data that we have added there. I mean, again, as I said, IL-17 and TNF, those come to our mind immediately when you ask about which cytokines are important. But just to give an example, IL-7 is one of these cytokines, which is one of these common gamma chain cytokines. And these common gamma chain cytokines are blocked by JAK inhibitors because there is JAK at the bottom of those, at the IL-17 receptor. And IL-7 has been found to be important, for example, in stimulating ILCs, the innate lymphoid cell, which we know is a part of the innate cells, and they secrete IL-23 and IL-17 also, as well as the mate cells. Those also have the IL-7 stimulates the mate cell. So that is just one example how some direct and indirect blockage of other cytokines help in the pathogenesis of axial SPA, and how blocking these cytokines by JAK inhibitors would help in these patients.
And what about 21? I know the JAK-STAT involved with 21 cytokine pathway. So is that an important cytokine to block?
Do you mean IL-23 or IL-21? So 12-23. Yeah, so
I thought 20. Yeah. Anyway, what were you going to say? Yeah,
no, I was going to say
was blocked. I wondered if
Yeah,
12 and 21 had an important role.
yes. So 21 is another common gamma chain cytokine. So it is there are several of these common gamma chain cytokines, and IL-2, IL-4, IL-5, IL-7, and 15 and 17 and 21. Those are some of the ones that come to my mind. And several of these have indirect effects down the line in the pathology of axial spondyloarthritis. I was also thinking about the JAK-1223 because JAK2 and TYK2, those are the two JAK molecules which are at the bottom of in the intracellular part of the receptor for both IL-12 and IL-23. And blocking those definitely would help in the other spondyloarthritis, such as psoriatic arthritis, where IL-12/23 inhibition has been found to be very useful. And that was the one that I was thinking when you first asked.
Yeah. Like axial is very tricky, isn't it? Because ustekinumab, which do block 12 and 23, doesn't seem to be that helpful for axial SPA, which is different to peripheral arthritis. And I've always been curious, the JAKs are so strong at blocking IL-6, and there's a lot of IL-6 in the spine, in the sacroiliac joints, and yet the IL-6 inhibitors didn't work in the AXPON studies. I don't quite understand why that should be.
Yeah. It only tells us that what we think theoretically should work may or may not work. And I can go even backwards. I mean, IL-1 was probably thought to be very important in rheumatoid arthritis, even more important than TNF. And IL-1 inhibitors do work in rheumatoid arthritis, but nowhere close to the efficacy as TNF inhibitors. And so unless you do the study in clinical patient population, you never really know whether what you think will be useful or important based on your theoretical knowledge. It may or may not really work. So these are some of these examples.
And clearly people who are interested in this paper can download it off the website, the CSF website, and it's a very nice discussion of the pathogenesis and how JAK-STAT is involved in that pathway. Let's talk a little about the key trials of the JAK inhibitors under development in AS. Do you want to comment on Select Access, UPA, and the filgotinib Tortuga study, and even the TOFA studies? Any comments you'd like to make about those trials and where you'll end up seeing the JAK inhibitors in the treatment algorithm for axSpA?
Yeah. So tofacitinib has done 2 trials. The phase 2 trial was done first. And the phase 2 trial, which was a very small trial, but they looked at the MRI of the sacroiliac joint in that particular trial, and then they followed that with a phase 3 trial. Both trials were successful. The phase 2 trial of tofacitinib, they compared the 2 milligram, 5 milligram, and 10 milligram dose of tofacitinib and found that the 5 milligram BID dose was successful, and that's the one which went on in the phase 3 trial. The phase 3 trial was completed, was recently published. Filgotinib did only one trial, which was the phase 2 trial, and for some reason the filgotinib entire program has gone on the back burner with the response they received from FDA about their rheumatoid arthritis study. And based on that, the entire filgotinib program has gone on the back burner, but their phase 2 study was very successful. And in both these studies, the tofacitinib and filgotinib ASAS-40 was the endpoint, and compared to placebo, both tofacitinib and filgotinib were found to be very successful. Upadacitinib completed a phase 2/3 study, and that's already published. And recently they have, and that study was done in patients with radiographic axial SPA or ankylosing spondylitis. They have followed that with 2 phase 3 studies, which are not yet published, but one study is on non-radiographic axial SPA and upadacitinib in that, and the other one is TNF inhibitor inadequate responder ankylosing spondylitis patients. And so those two studies are different than the first phase 2/3 study, which was done in our routine study of TNF ankylosing spondylitis patients who are TNF inhibitor naive. And upadacitinib also showed quite significant, robust responses in the phase 2/3 study, which is currently out and published. Recently at the ACR meeting, we presented data on the long-term extension of that study as well. In short, both of these show pretty significant the tofacitinib and upadacitinib, the two molecules which are still in the market, they definitely show pretty significant efficacy in the treatment of ankylosing spondylitis, and the SS20, SS40, BASDAI50, the usual responses that we look at in these trials for efficacy look pretty good. None of these are as yet approved in the US for the treatment of ankylosing spondylitis. Upadacitinib is approved in Europe, as far as I know, for the treatment of ankylosing spondylitis. So we are awaiting from FDA a response very soon.
And FDA makes a funny decision, that forgotten decision. It looks like it's got the least lost the signal. And the male sperm study ended up showing that the control group had a lower sperm count than the treatment group, but it didn't stop the FDA upsetting the apple cart. And as you said, they just took Filgo away from the US, and it's being marketed in Europe and Japan. So yeah, I've seen the UPA data looks very nice in AS. They prevented radiological progression. They hit all their primary and secondary endpoints, all the different domains. It looks very nice, not just in the NSET-IR bio-naive, but also in the bio-experienced. They had very nice results. So where do you think the JAKs will land in the algorithm? We're all very TNF glued on at 17. Yeah. Where's it going to land?
I think they will land quite high, in the sense that, if you compare rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis together versus ankylosing spondylitis, or axial SPA, I should say, we do not have, outside of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, we have nothing which are oral pills, such as methotrexate, such as sulfasalazine, such as hydroxychloroquine or leflunomide. Yeah, exactly. We don't have any of that in the ankylosing spondylitis, axial spondyloarthritis arena. These being the first pills, I think they are going to be very, very useful for the ease of giving to patients. And in many parts of the world, and as I said earlier, I'm from India. When I go to India, I mean, the people don't even have refrigerators in their house, and to store biologics in their own house is a huge, big problem. Pills are always so easy for people to carry, for travel, for so many ways. And when they're outside of non-steroidal, these are the first oral pills which have been found to be useful. So I think this is going to be a very useful addition. You asked me a question about the earlier on about the oral surveillance trial, and that is, people are awaiting with, what exactly will FDA tell us to do about this about this indication. My guess is they will probably say something similar, that be careful and do a good sort of discussion with the patients and do shared decision making. Now, the difference between this group of patients that we see, these are generally younger patients. This starts at a very in the age group, which is different than when rheumatoid arthritis might start a little bit later. Even though cardiovascular morbidity is a major feature in patients with axial spondyloarthritis, because of their younger age, it might be a little bit less compared to, say, in rheumatoid arthritis or psoriatic arthritis. And so the acceptance of JAK inhibitors in the field of axial spondyloarthritis might be better acceptance compared to what we are seeing in rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis. So from that angle also, I think this will land a little bit higher, and people might be starting to use it sooner.
Much less comorbidities and younger, healthier group. I've not seen any uveitis data. And the JAKs will be quite nice as a treatment for inflammatory bowel disease. So
Yep.
some of the extra-articular manifestations are covered. Do we know about uveitis or haven't seen it yet?
It certainly doesn't seem to worsen uveitis. So if you look at the safety part, and we can go into that discussion if you want, but in the safety aspect of JAK inhibitors, both for tofacitinib and upadacitinib, the number of uveitis cases were not increased, and those who had uveitis, there were cases of uveitis, of course, and spondyloarthritis patients have higher risk of uveitis compared to, say, psoriatic arthritis patients. But there were no increased, the rates were quite low, and those patients who had uveitis, almost all of them had uveitis to start with, or they had history of uveitis before. So whether it will treat uveitis, we don't know. It certainly doesn't seem to worsen uveitis. And you're right. I mean, IBD, it appears that JAK inhibitors might in fact be a treatment for IBD. And to our surprise, as you know this very well, upadacitinib showed a very good response on the skin, which tofacitinib hadn't really shown as well. And so dermatologists were not too happy with tofa's efficacy on skin in psoriasis, but upadacitinib skin efficacy looks quite good. So that's also that's a positive thing for these other manifestations these patients have.
So another paper on the CSF website was an Argentinian meta-analysis in IBD. And it really, as you've said, it came down in favor of the JAKs over the TNFs in inflammatory bowel disease. But those meta-analyses are just comparing papers with different patient populations, and I'm not sure how much credence we should pay to them. But anyway, so any final comments on this paper about the JAK-STAT pathway, the understanding in axSpA, the future in axSpA?
Yeah, so I think it certainly gives us an additional drug in the armamentarium. Again, comparing where the treatment field and available choices we have for axial SPA, very limited compared to what we have in psoriatic arthritis, compared to what we have in rheumatoid arthritis. As you said, we were hoping IL-6 inhibitors should work, and they did not work. We were hoping IL-23 inhibitors would work, did not work. So JAK inhibitors have given us, when they get approved, will be a very welcome new drug in our armamentarium to treat axial spondyloarthritis patients. And the risks also don't look very dramatically different than what we saw in rheumatoid arthritis. There were some cases with herpes zoster that we know to watch for, because these patients are younger and they have got less comorbidity burden, as we said. Overall, I think looking down the road, I think this will become a predominant class of drugs for use in axial spondyloarthritis, because IBD, especially as we were speaking just a minute ago, is a common problem, and IL-17 inhibitors really cannot be used. So from that point of view, I think JAK inhibitors would be competing with TNF inhibitors as the first-line drug as well, is my guess.
Excellent. So thank you again for your time, Atul. Greatly appreciate you. We know how busy you are. If you'd like to know more about this paper and others uploaded to the CSF website this month, you can get detailed slide sets available in the publication section at cytokinesignaling.com. Please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or other podcast media. Let us know what you think. Give us some feedback. Rate us in the iTunes, and we greatly appreciate your time. It's great to see you, and stay well, Atul. We'll catch up face to face. Jula, Copenhagen.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good to see you. Take care.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.